Welcome everybody to HVAC service tips for the cold season. My number one tip for the heating season is to start with having a carbon monoxide detector or a CO monitor. I believe that is the most important thing for anyone to have, no matter what climate you're in, where you're at. I recommend installing one in the furnace room or close to your furnace, and the other one I recommend installing is in the bedroom or the hallway to the bedrooms if you have multiple rooms. The second thing I recommend is if you have a battery operated thermostat, replacing the batteries at this time also. Having dead batteries, if you have dead batteries, your furnace isn't going to operate. So having fresh batteries in your thermostat is also very beneficial. Of course, always replacing the furnace filter. Having a clean, efficient furnace filter definitely saves energy. Other things that can be recommended is use the energy saving mode on your thermostat if you have one, if one is available. The modern thermostats know how to save the most energy, which saves you money. Other things I recommend you doing is if you have a propane furnace, checking the propane levels in your tank. Having full propane tanks is very beneficial. You don't want to run out of propane when it's needed the most. Lastly, having a qualified technician look at your furnace. Doing planned maintenance on your furnace can catch problems that may arise throughout the heating season. What to do in an HVAC emergency situation. If your heat suddenly stops working, the first thing I recommend you doing is just checking this power, making sure you don't have a tripped breaker. I would reset your unit. I would turn it to the off position and then turn it back on. Also, I would just listen and observe what you actually see happening. There's a sequence of operation and it's stopping in the middle of a certain sequence of operation, and you can usually explain that or even Google or YouTube where your heating operation is stopping and check to see where you should go to next or what you should check for next. I do not recommend working on your own furnace. I think that should be handled by a qualified technician. If your heat would fail in your house, I just recommend going to a hardware store or big box store and getting electric heaters and just installing those throughout the house. Of course, make sure you're checking on them. Believe it or not, I do have two funny no heat situations. This is in the commercial world also. So I have received a no heat call, and when I arrived, I went to the thermostat to look at the thermostat, and it was in the off position. So all it took for that service call there was to actually turn it to the heat mode to get the heat operating. Of course, what happened was somebody else in the office was a little too hot, so instead of turning the thermostat down, they just went ahead and just turned it completely off. And of course, whoever else who was cold didn't suspect that the thermostat would be turned into the off position. So they just called a service call. So of course that was a nice and easy service call. All right. The second service call I've ran into was basically the same thing, except for this time the no heat call. When I arrived and looked at the thermostat, the battery light was flashing, the low battery light. And all that was required this time was to replace the batteries with a new set of batteries. After I did that and turned the thermostat back on, the heat fired right up. So sometimes, obviously, big problems aren't big problems at all. They're tiny little simple problems that you should at least look at and investigate before you end up calling a service call. My funniest and favorite story that I had for a no heat service call is I received a phone call, which you will sometimes, from your family members, and this one actually came from my mother-in-law. And the backstory is I was out really late the previous night, and I mean really late, and my mother-in-law called me very, very early in the morning. I mean, I might have been asleep for 2 hours. And when she called, of course, she's calling to say, hey, Danny, I have no heat. What should I do? The only thing I could recommend for her to do was, and this is what I told her, I said, I recommend that you would bake a cake until I can get over there. And then I hung the phone up. Of course, as soon as I woke up, I immediately went over and fixed the heat. But today, I think that's still my funniest no heat call to or from a family member. Okay, of course, again, the number one thing I recommend is a carbon monoxide detector. I think that's the most important thing that anybody can do. Do research before you place a service call. Check the batteries in your thermostat. Make sure it is on. Make sure you do have power to this system. MSD is a commercial company. We really don't do residential work, but that doesn't mean if you have a residential question that we couldn't or wouldn't answer it for you. The client really is the most important person here. Any question that anybody in the service department could help out with, never hesitate to ask one of us. Thanks for listening. I hope I've answered some questions, and I hope you've learned a little bit.